You know what? I would bet that painting wet into wet is probably one of the most used techniques in watercolor. And if you've been trying to paint wet into wet, but you're not really 100% sure how wet the paper needs to be before you add your paint, that's what we're going to be talking about in this tutorial. We're going to paint a simple hydrangea flower, and I'm going to show you how much water you need to get a balanced and smooth wash on each petal. And then once you start to understand water control, you're going to feel a lot more confident with your wet and wet washes, because you're going to know how wet your paper needs to be before you ever touch your paper with your brush. There are two follow-up videos that go along with this one. The first one is going to show you how to paint in those little bitty veins in the petals, and then the second one is going to show you how to paint a shadow behind the flower so it'll look like you could just pick it right up off the paper. And another thing, if you have been wanting your watercolor paintings to look a little more realistic, I have a free guide for you. It's called The One Magic Trick to Improve Your Watercolor. I'll leave a link in the description box below for you. Alrighty then, let's go paint a hydrangea. Before we begin, I just want to introduce you to the colors that I'm going to be using today. So this combination is a set of colors that I use together a lot, especially if I'm doing florals. They just work really well together, and sometimes I'll switch out the rose for carmine or maybe quinacridone red or something like that, just depending on what the flower is that I'm painting. Phthalo blue red shade is probably my all-time favorite blue, because it's very versatile. Likewise with the Nicolezo yellow. It can be lighter, but then it can also be used darker when you layer it or use it in a thicker consistency. Sometimes also, depending on what I'm painting, I might change this out for Hansa yellow because it's more of a bright lemony color. But for today and this little hydrangea, these are the three colors that I'm going to use. Now I want to show you my palette. And the way that I have my colors mixed up is I have my quinacridone rose over here all by its lonesome. Then here I have quinacridone rose with a little bit of the yellow in it because this particular hydrangea is pink, but it has a little bit of an orangey color to it. So to get it to look a little more peach-like, I decided to add some yellow to it. And then here is the same mix as here. I've just added a little bit of the blue. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right into getting this hydrangea going. Now, of course, the thing that we're really discussing here and that I'm wanting to show you is, first of all, how to paint wet into wet, and then how to use value to get this flower to look realistic. And remember, we're just going to paint the flower today, and I'm going to have a separate tutorial for how to get the shadow painted in and how to put in some of the fine little veins. So I'm going to get started by getting this petal wet. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit just so you can see a little bit closer. I'm going to move this down just a touch. So I'm loading my brush up with plenty of water, and you're going to notice that my graphite lines are going to kind of disappear, and the reason why is because I just used some tracing paper lightly because I didn't want to have heavy lines show up. So as I load this paper with some water, it's going to pick up some of that graphite and make it disappear, which is really not a terrible thing because I want to be able to kind of tell where those lines are, but I don't want them to be showing up in my painting. So let me tilt this. See how much water is on there? I missed a little spot. There's enough water on here that when I tilt the board, see how it puddles up right here? That is where you need to start out if wet into wet and knowing how much water to use is a struggle for you. And then what we'll do is we're going to let this sit for a while until the point where when we tilt the paper up, it no longer has a puddle, but it still has a shiny surface. Let's take another look. Okay, still very shiny, but it's not really puddling up. It had a little bit there, but not enough for me to worry about. So now I'm going to go into my more watery consistency of the rose and yellow, and I'm going to put my base wash on.
I'm just pushing this color around. Now, something that I want to draw your attention to is the consistency of this paint is more water than pigment, and I would say that this is more of a coffee wash. Now, if you are not familiar with that term, I also have a free tutorial that's called From Tea to Butter, and it will teach you about a tea wash and the water to paint ratio all the way up through butter and how much paint and water goes into making that consistency of paint. So if that is something that you're not familiar with, then definitely check out that video, because you'll hear not only myself but a lot of other artists using that terminology, and it's just to help students understand how thick they need their paint to be. So you can get familiar with that in that free tutorial on my channel. Okay, so now I've got a nice even wash, and I'm going to let this sit on the paper for just a minute, and I'm going to probably pull up a little bit of color from this area and this area. The reason why is because there is some light striking this petal here and here. Then I also have shadows in this area, and over here. So once I get these highlights pulled out, if my paper is still at the right dampness, I will decide if I'm going to go ahead and put those shadows in now, or if I'm going to let it get dry and come back and do it later. Now let's see. It's still fairly shiny. I've rinsed my brush and I'm drying the water out. I'm just going to take a look and see if I'm going to be able to lift up this color where I want to lift it up. Seems like it's going to do okay. There is a perfect moment in time with your paper that the dampness is just right and it allows you the opportunity to lift some color out just like that. My reason for doing this is because, as I said, there's light shining on here, and that is partly what's going to give this petal its shape, is having those light areas and dark areas. I also see a little bit of streaks of light down through here in other areas. So every time that I run my brush across my paper, I rinse it out and I take most of that water out of my brush so that I have a brush that is going to act more like a mop and actually soak up that moisture and paint for me. I could have actually let this dry a little bit longer, but these highlights are fairly subtle, so I'm going to leave it right there. Now, I'm not going to paint either of these two petals next, just because I don't want to paint a wet area next to an area that is still damp, because if I do that, I'm going to end up getting a back run, a bloom, a cauliflower. People call it different things, but it just means that I would end up getting water into this damp paper, and the water is going to push this color and it's going to mess up my nice glaze here. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to hop over here and I'm going to do this petal. And since I'm doing the exact same thing on the rest of these petals, I'm not going to make you watch me in real time. I'm going to speed this up, but you'll just know that I'm doing the exact same thing. But if I feel like there's a special area that I need to stop and explain myself, I will do that. What I'm doing on this petal is I am putting in more color over on this side because there's a nice big shadow over here. And then I'm just kind of tapping that out of my brush, and over here is where the petal is light. So I've just left a teensy bit of paint in the brush, and now I am putting that down over here in this light area, and that's going to help me create the reflection or the sun that is shining on this petal right here without necessarily having to lift color up. I've let the whole flower dry now, and what I'm going to do next is show you how we're going to go back into these same petals and we're going to add some of the deeper values. We're going to do this wet into wet as well. So I'm going to wet this whole petal, by having the whole petal wet, it's going to give us more time to paint and play around in here without everything drying out. Now, I am sitting underneath an air conditioning vent, so there is the possibility that mine is going to dry out sooner than yours might, but anyway, I will work with it as I need to. So I've got a thicker consistency of my shadow color, which was the yellow, the rose, and the blue mixed together. And I'm going to bring that in right over here. I've just got a little bit on my brush. I want to be in control of where this shadow goes. So I'm watching my reference photo and I'm following along the path of where I see this shadow. It comes right up through here. I'm going to leave that where it is. I'm going to come over here along this outside edge because there is some shadowing over here as well. And see how I'm just kind of dotting my brush around, because this petal does have a lot of texture and this is just getting that started. Okay, since that vent is blowing over my head, my paper is already starting to dry out. So since I've noticed that, I'm going to come in here with my wet brush and put more water so that I get this color to flow instead of just sitting in one spot. But what I was saying is, I'm just tapping on some of this color to start establishing where some of that texture is, but then in a separate tutorial, I will show you how to actually paint in some of those little tiny veins. And then, as I said, I'll have another tutorial that will show you how to paint in the shadow that's down around here. Now, painting this wet into wet is giving me a nice soft edged shadow. I can tell that this is not dark enough up here. It's still a little bit damp, so I can come back in here and put some more paint. Now I'm going to rinse my brush, take all the water out, and just use the very last couple of hairs on this brush just to blend that out so it still has a nice soft transition from the darker shadow to the lighter area. Over here as well. Now the consistency of the paint that I have right now is more like what I would consider to be half and half. I can tell that this is getting to a point where I need to stop messing around in there or I'm going to have a mess. So I'm going to jump on over to this petal and I'm going to get it wet as well. I'm going to tilt it so you can see how wet it is. It's wet and it has a shininess to it, but it's not puddling up anywhere. If I see any places that looks like they're trying to dry out too fast, I will just put a little more water in those areas. I'm noticing as I'm painting this that these shadows are also, they have a very defined edge. So I'm going to let that dry before I come back in and finish these shadows here. Color that I mixed up, which is the three colors mixed together, getting a little on my brush, but then I am taking a lot of that out because I want to do a little bit of dry brushing over here. I need a little more texture. If it goes too heavy, I'll just blot it. As a matter of fact, I'm going to get a clean paper towel because I do not want to end up putting color back down in a place where I don't want it. And I am barely touching my brush to the surface of the paper. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to do something a little bit similar. These are not really the veins. They're kind of indicating that there are veins in there, but I really want to hone in on how to do those separately. But anywhere that I see some texture, and a little bit different color, that's where I'm going to do some dry brushing. Definitely on this petal over here. And when I tell you that I'm getting hardly any paint on my brush, I am not exaggerating. There is barely any color there at all. The last thing that I'm going to do is just a simple tea wash over the whole thing. And I still have to do the center. But before I get to that, I do want to do this tea wash. This, for me, just kind of gets everything harmonized. If there's any areas that look too harsh, it helps to smooth those out a little bit. And I'm not really changing the values that I have on my petals. I'm just giving it a nice soft glaze so that everything works well together. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paint the center of this flower. I'm going to use my rubber cement pickup. There's two of them here stuck together. Oh, and I'll use that to pull the masking fluid off. And I'm going to get my smallest brush. And I'm going to use that tea wash color that I had because this is not very dark. It's fairly light. So I'm just going to paint it wet onto dry, just like this. I might put a little more color in there. And then what I need to do is I need to let this paint dry. Then I can come back in and paint in the shadows. So hang tight for just a second. Let me get this dry and then I'll show you how to make it look round and like it's standing up out of the center of the flower. So I am using the shadow color that I created, which was the yellow, rose, and blue. I've just watered it down some. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to get this damp. Doesn't need a lot of water. It's a very small space. I'm going to let that sit up for a moment. Then I'm going to take my more watered down consistency of the shadow color, and I'm just barely touching the tip of the brush into the paint. So the only paint that's on my brush is just the very last little hair or two that's touching the surface of the paint when I go in and pick it up. So the light is coming from the left, which means there's going to be a shadow on the right. And so that's what I am putting in here now. I'm going to get a little bit more on my brush. And I'm going to tap it right down here around the outside edge because I really want it to get dark down in there. So I just picked up the same color, just a thicker consistency. Okay, so now I'm going back into this same paint, and I can barely see my lines, but this should be dry. And I'm going to paint in these little pie shapes is the only thing that I know how to describe them as. And see how I'm curving them? That is part of what's going to make this look round and as if it is actually curving down into this flower and that it is round in shape. Now I'm doing a little dry brushing. I'm taking that shadow color, but the one that's watered down, not so intense, and I'm just coming around this outside edge and adding a little bit more. Now I'm going to wet my brush. Oh, don't want it to do that. And I'm going to just use a damp brush to soften this together. And if I feel like I need to add some more color, I'm going to pick up dry color, which just means that it is sitting on my palette and there's really not any water in it. It's just dried up. And so I'm just using my brush and the moisture that's in the brush to grab a hold of that paint. Okay, so here we are with the flower painted in. You're going to notice that we've got deeper colors down in the center where the flower petals turn down. This little flower petal here has a little lip on it that curves up. So we have this shadow that is formed here. This side of the petal is light. So I have left that light, put in the shadows that are being cast onto this petal from these two. And then of course there's a little shadow here where this petal is curved down, and a little shadow here where this petal is curved up. And then all I did was I took my Rosemary & Co. Series 502 scrubber brush, and any areas that I felt like were a little too dark, I just dipped it in water and just very lightly rubbed over that area of paint and then blotted it up with my paper towel. So that's how I added some of those lighter areas. So that's the end of this tutorial, and you could certainly leave this flower just like this if you wanted to. However, if you want to watch the next one where I'm going to show you how to put in some of the little dark veins that I see, then that's going to be in a separate tutorial, and you're going to see these little light lines right here. This will be in the tutorial that shows you how to paint a realistic shadow, and what that's going to do, it's going to make this flower look like it's sitting on a table or a piece of paper or whatever, and it's going to make it raise up off the surface, and it's going to look like you could just pick it up and take it with you. So those will be part 2 and part 3. I hope that you will go and check those out, and I'm going to link them right up here or right here or somewhere, and if I forget, it'll be in the description box below. Thanks for hanging out with me and painting this flower, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.